Check, check.
Okay, take two. So as I mentioned, my name is Tricia Henderson, and I'm the Climate Action Officer with the Town of Oakville. I want to thank you for spending the morning with us during Emergency Preparedness Week, both in person and for those that are joining us virtually. It is the beginning of Emergency Preparedness Week, and I think it's very important that you're here to learn how you can better protect yourselves, your loved ones, and your property and possessions from the impacts of climate change. I'd also like to say a thank you to St. Paul's for allowing us the space to have this session today. I have the pleasure of working with the Halton Environmental Network and the emergency management departments of both the town and the region on a collaborative project called OakvilleReady. OakvilleReady is a program designed to build climate resiliency within the town of Oakville by using a neighbors helping neighbors approach. OakvilleReady consists of 8 neighborhood hubs located throughout Oakville, designed to help in times of need and to provide year-round education. St. Paul's, where we're located today, is one of those 8 neighborhood climate hubs. And that means that in the instance of a power outage, localized flooding, or a severe winter storm, St. Paul's and the 7 other neighborhood hubs are prepared to welcome you to visit, chat with you, provide information on the situation at hand, maybe make you a cup of tea and allow you to charge your electronics in times of need. It's a short-term care to provide assurance and help residents during extreme weather events. Not only does OakvilleReady help in times of need, the program also provides year-round climate preparedness and education, as we are doing here today. Our newest initiative just launched on Monday for Emergency Preparedness Week, and it is called the OakvilleReady Community Climate Action Grant. This grant offers up to $2,000 for eligible projects that aim to reduce emissions, reduce energy use, increase biodiversity, food security, and extreme weather preparedness. More information on this grant is available on the OakvilleReady.ca website, and we do have information at out the front doors there. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Ellen Murray to introduce our guest speaker today. Ellen is from the Halton Environmental Network.
Good morning. I am Ellen from Halton Environmental Network, and I am the Director of Garden Programs. To start off, as a community, we have the responsibility to honor, care for, and respect all that creation gives us to provide us with life. This includes the land, water, air, fire, animals, plants, and our ancestors. The Anishinaabe peoples have utilized this land for millennia, and we would like to acknowledge their direct descendants, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land upon which we live, work, and conduct ourselves. We acknowledge our treaty relationship and responsibilities to both the land and these original peoples. We also recognize that this land is rich in pre-contact history and customs, which includes the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, and since European contact has and continues to become home for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And it is in this spirit and intent of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, whereby we collectively care for and respect the land, water, animals, and each other in the interest of peace and friendship, and for the benefit of not only ourselves, but of our future descendants. We are very happy and honored to welcome Dr. Blair Feltmate to our Emergency Preparedness Week event. Dr. Feltmate is the head of the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo. His previous positions have included various senior roles in sustainable development, and he holds a number of advisory roles at a variety of climate change, adaptation, and risk management organizations across Canada and internationally. He's on the Government of Ontario's Climate Advisory Board and was the chair of the Government of Canada's expert panel on climate adaptation. Dr. Feltman earned his PhD in theoretical and applied ecology from the University of Toronto and was an NSERC postdoctoral fellow at the University of Waterloo. He has also studied zoology, biology, and sustainable development. He has written textbooks on the topics of sustainable banking and aquatic ecology, You may recognize his name and voice from his over 100 media appearances a year on climate change and environmental, social, and governance topics. I know I heard him on the CBC a couple of weeks ago. So we look forward to learning about what we can do to prepare for the challenges of flooding and extreme heat in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I certainly appreciate being here this morning. And by the way, I'm quite happy, even before turning to the talk, that if you have questions as we go along and you know, they're kind of short and you wish me to address them, I'm happy to do that. So I'm pleased to be here to talk about preparing for the challenges of flooding and extreme heat, or in other words, when things go wrong along the lines of that which you see depicted in these pictures, too much water in the wrong place causing flooding at the community level and then down to and including flooded basements, or we may have extreme heat events occurring that in the worst case scenario in this country can actually be lethal. For example, in British Columbia in 2021 during a heat wave, we had 619 people die prematurely due to extreme heat. In Quebec in 2018 during an extreme heat event, we had 86 people die prematurely due to extreme heat. When these events occur, flooding or extreme heat, what is it we can do to better prepare communities and households so they don't suffer unduly given the advent of these events occurring? So basically that's where we're going to head. And by the way, this is a short list of climate perils that are problematic and have applicability to this area and perhaps into Toronto as well. But the longer list of perils that are impacting across Canada, they include flood, drought, fire, hail, wind, snow load, permafrost loss, sea level rise, contraction of Arctic sea ice, and extreme heat. In other words, there's a long list of things going wrong that have varying degrees of applicability depending on where you look in Canada. But these two perils have applicability to this region. So that's why I'm zeroing in on those. And just to give you a little bit more detail where we're heading, I'm going to start out by just painting the picture of the formidability of climate change, just to put us all on the same page, making the point that, amongst other points, climate change is irreversible, period. Climate change is here to stay. We're not going backwards on climate change. By mitigating or lowering the discharge of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we can slow down the rate of change, which we should be doing. But we also need to accept the reality that climate change is here and extreme weather events are going to get more extreme going forward. So when we think about preparedness, not only do we prepare for the events that are hitting today, we have to prepare in anticipation of what the world might look like 25 or 50 years down the road. Then I'm going to turn to documenting the increasing costs associated with climate change and extreme weather events. And that's both the financial costs and the psychosocial or the mental health challenges and stress that's being realized due to climate change. And I can tell you now, when I go through points 1 or 2, it's not really going to put you in a good mood. It's depressing, to be honest. And but it is the reality nonetheless. But things pick up a bit under point number 3. Then I'm going to flip to the good news the good news, which is that over the last 10 to 15 years in this country, we've actually developed very good, practical, executable guidelines that can be deployed to take risk out of the system. So we have the solutions for many of the problems. Now the challenge is the mobilization of solutions. So things get a bit more positive and uplifting towards the end. So roughly speaking, that's where we're going to head. Starting with the first point first, that climate change is irreversible and severe weather will get more challenging. And by the way, remember, this is in the context of when you watch the news at night and it just seems like we've got fires here, heat waves here, floods here, whatever the events may be. As bad as that may sound and the degree to which that leads the news right now on a lot of evenings, I just want to point out that is going to, as bad as things are, they're going to get more challenging going forward. Now, this isn't my cavalier opinion. This is an opinion expressed by a number of authoritative agencies and peoples across this country and internationally. For example, on the left-hand side of the slide, we have Canada's Changing Climate Report 2019. And this is a report that was authored by more or less a dozen climate scientists working for Environment and Climate Change Canada, so recognized experts and authorities on the subject of climate change. One of the statements they made in this report, and I'll read it, and it's in italics because I've taken the statement directly from the report. They said, Canada's climate has warmed and will warm further in the future, driven by human influence, which is the burning of fossil fuels, which when coal, oil, and natural gas are burnt, they release CO2 into the atmosphere. More CO2 in the atmosphere traps heat energy that would have otherwise escaped into space. It stays in the atmosphere, causing overall warming. And with more energy in the system, that heat in the system is effectively energy. When we have weather occurring, the severity of the weather is more challenging because there's just more energy in the system that otherwise would have dissipated into space. So, driven by human influence, this warming is effectively irreversible. And this is the first time that, at least I'm aware of, that the federal government of Canada recognized the irreversibility of climate change. And then just building on that report and consistent with the messaging, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is an association of several hundred climate scientists from around the world, that's all they do 7 days a week is study climate science. They wrote this report, Climate Change 2022, Impacts, Adaptation, and Vulnerability. This came out, well, in that year. And in that report, they said, it is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change, which means the burning of fossil fuels, making extreme climate events, including heat waves, heavy rainfall, and droughts, more frequent and severe. And just to put a finer point on it, most recently, the United Nations, working with IPCC, made the point that in this report, released November of last year, some future changes are unavoidable and or irreversible, but can be limited by deep, rapid, and sustained global greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So we can slow things down, which we should be doing. Up to this point in Canada, or maybe up to 3 or 4 years ago, I would say 90% or something like that of the discussion about climate change in Canada was on how to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And are we going to have a carbon tax and a cap and trade system and so forth? And that's all good. That's good stuff to think about and direct energy to. But it was almost to the total exclusion of considering, but how do we prepare for the extreme weather that's on the ground today and the greater risk that's coming? And all that position started to change, I would say 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago. Oakville's ahead of the curve on this file. Started to change when we were starting to see more forest fires, more flooding, more extreme heat events, and it was really very much in your face that it couldn't be ignored. And now we've turned the corner to start to embrace adaptation much more readily, meaning preparedness for extreme weather than was historically the case. Just to add a few more points here, sometimes when people hear about the COP meetings, the international meetings that people attend all around the world once a year somewhere to figure out what are we going to do about climate change, or you hear about the Paris Accord, or you'll read in the newspapers or see on the news discussions about net zero, we're going to get to net zero, all good things to do. I think sometimes, though, that can be a little bit dangerous because it can be delusional in the sense of thinking that it's just a matter of a few years that we're going to turn all this stuff around by mitigating greenhouse gas emissions or committing to net zero. Good stuff to do, but we have to realize, no, we are not going to go backwards on that file. And just in reference to the COP talks, the Council of the Parties, attended by countries from all over the world, in 1995, the year of the first COP, global demand for oil was 70 million barrels a day. The International Energy Agency announced not that long ago, just before Christmas, that in 2028, oil demand will be about 106 million barrels a day. There will be 50% greater use of oil on this planet in 2028 as compared to the first COP meeting held in 1995, for which the purpose was to reduce fossil fuel use on the planet. And that's not a criticism of COP, by the way, because you could argue without COP, this might not be 106 million barrels a day. This could be 140 million barrels of oil a day. So, and remember I said, at the beginning, this is all kind of depressing, right? So we're still in the depressing phase, right? Okay, so what's driving this? Most fundamentally at the core is increasing population on the planet. The world's population increases right now, as we're speaking here, net by about 8,000 people per hour net. If you subtract deaths from births, every single hour, there's 8,000 more people on the planet. So if we're in here in an hour, maybe an hour and a bit, whatever it is, there will be 10,000 more people on the planet when we leave this room as compared to when we walked in the door. 10,000 more. If you do the math, that works out to about 70 million more people on the planet per year, which means by 2035 to 2037, we're going to have another 1 to 1.2 billion people on the planet beyond the 8 billion people we currently have. And these are people we have to feed, house, clothe, educate, and provide energy for. As of this moment, about 78 to 79% of world energy supply comes from more or less a third, coal, oil, and natural gas. Going forward, renewables such as wind and solar power will constitute a greater percentage of world energy supply, but the pie, the demand for energy is getting greater, so the overall CO2 emissions will increase. So again, and then as if all of this stuff hasn't brought you down enough, and I don't have time to go into it, but climate change is actually driving climate change now, independent of the burning of fossil fuels. For example, when we have warming, I'll just give one quick example. When we have warming on the planet, the warming causes permafrost to melt. When permafrost melts, permanently frozen ground, it releases a potent greenhouse gas called methane. Methane traps more energy in the system, more heat. The more heat in the system, the more permafrost that melts. It's a positive feedback system. And we have the same positive feedback system functioning through loss of ice in the Arctic region over the last 40 to 50 years, and about a 40 to 45% loss of algae in the surface layer of the oceans around the world. That also creates a positive feedback system. So my point here is to really drive home that, yes, we should be working to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions to slow down the rate of change, but we really have to prepare for a very formidable and challenging future on climate change that is coming at us. Now, turning to the costs. What do the costs look like associated with climate change? One of the best ways to present the costs or document the costs is to look at the amount of money paid out through catastrophic loss insurable claims over time in the country. And just forget the chart for a second. In insurance terms, a catastrophic event is any event like a flood, a wildfire, a windstorm, an ice storm. If it triggers more than $25 million in insurance claims, that's called a catastrophic insurable event. And then we have a group in Canada called CatIQ that adds up all these numbers on an annual basis and plots them out on this chart. And by the way, all the numbers on this chart, which I'll describe in a second, they've been corrected for inflation and for per capita wealth accumulation. In other words, if you were insuring twice as many homes today as 10 years ago, you would think you expect your insurance costs to be twice as high simply because you're insuring twice as many homes. This chart corrects for inflation and for per capita wealth accumulation, taking those factors into account such that horizontally, we're looking at a comparison of apples to apples. So what does this mean? What's notable here? What you can see, we have time on the x-axis in the lower left-hand corner, 1983, in the lower right, 2023. And on the y-axis, money paid out in billions of dollars. And what you note here is from 1983 up to 2008, on the flatter part of this black curve, the insurance industry in the country could count on paying out between about $250 to $450 million per year in claims for extreme weather events. Everything, though, started to change on or about from 2009 onwards, whereby for 14 out of the last 15 years, the catastrophic loss claims have gone over $1 billion per year, every year for 14 out of the last 15 years, for an average cost of about $2.1 billion. And the culprit that's driving most of the upward bend in this curve is too much water in the wrong place, flooding. Residential basement flooding is the #1 cost of climate change in Canada, followed by wildfire. And what's particularly notable here, it's not just that the costs are going up, they're going up curvilinearly, which means things are getting worse faster. So this is not where we want to be. And remember, during the pandemic, we talked about bending down the curve. So we need to bend this curve down. And by the way, that's where we're going to head, is how do you do that? There is a way to do this that we're not doing on scale in the country. And by the way, this situation is such that it is now the case, and this would be the same for Oakville, about 10% of residential homes in Canada, which is 1.5 million homes, are no longer insurable for flood damage, floodwater in the basements. So 10% of Canadians, including within Oakville, about 10% of people now cannot get flood insurance for their homes. They can still get insurance coverage for theft and fire, but not for water damage in the basements. And the cap limits to which the insurers are providing insurance are coming down, the amount they're willing to insure you for. And the insurance rates have increased by about 10 to 20% across the country, and I'm pretty sure in this region would be the same. They've increased by 10 to 20% over the last 6 years, and about 60% of that increase is due to flooding. We also now have cases whereby it's not just lack of insurance coverage. Without insurance coverage, you can still get a mortgage on a house. Without flood insurance for your basement, you can still get a mortgage. But now what we're seeing in Quebec, for example, maybe a month ago, Desjardins announced that in certain towns in Quebec where flood risk is particularly high, they've stopped providing mortgages, no mortgage coverage for homes in certain towns in Quebec. And once Desjardins does it, the banks will follow and so forth, because the mathematics and the threat's the same for pretty much everybody. And if it can hit Quebec, it can hit Ontario, it can hit Alberta. And so the formidability of the challenge is certainly there. The good news is, and by the way, for every $1 that's lost in insurable losses, there are $3 to $4 of uninsurable losses. So if you look at total losses, you would multiply all this data by 3 to 4 times, and that's the amount of money being lost overall. These are just the insurable losses. The good news is, there is good news, by the way, and we are getting there. The good news is that $1 invested in adaptation produces about $3 to $8 in avoided losses, damage that now doesn't occur because you prepared for events. So adaptation has a fantastic return on investment. $1 invested in adaptation produces $3 to $8 in avoided losses per decade, per 10-year period. And that ratio of $1 in versus $3 to $8 in avoided losses, Warren Buffett would love that. That has been derived by the Global Commission on Adaptation, so an international organization, the World Resources Institute, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, our calculations within the Intact Center and other entities. 4 or 5 independent studies come up with the same ratio. So that's the good news. And then I'll get off the negative stuff soon. But just to go a little bit further, when you watch the news at night and you see communities that are hit hard with flooding, you look out on the streets and there's water everywhere and houses look like they're in the middle of a lake, that kind of thing. Pictures like you see on the front cover of this report, there's obviously no question about it that when this type of flooding occurs in communities, there's a negative impact on the residential housing market, on the value of homes found that find themselves in this type of condition. But the question is, to what degree, if anything, does flooding in a community in a period in the aftermath of flooding affect amongst other things, the sold price of homes that find themselves in these communities subject to this type of flooding? So we took on this question and ultimately producing this report, and this work was supported by CMHC and the Global Risk Institute and a few others, and Intact Financial. We actually took on this question and effectively what it amounted to see what was the impact of flooding in communities on residential housing. and ultimately the sold price of homes. When homes are listed for sale, how long do they sit there? Or is there a change in the number of homes listed for sale? How long do they sit on the market before they sell if they're in this type of community? And is there an impact on the mortgages or defaults and deferrals on mortgages? And the long and short of how we did this study is we went over the last 10 years in Canada to cities right across the country, from BC to the Maritimes, where there was catastrophic flooding. We went into these communities in the flood zone, and then another zone that would be close by, identical in all regards, but it didn't get hit by the flood, so it could act as a control group. And we looked at the changes in these variables for between a flood-impacted community versus a non-flood impacted community for a period of 6 months after the flood occurred. That was the time frame we looked at. So in other words, if you had a big flood in a community, and for 6 months after, let's say the sold price of homes in the flood impact community went up 3%, but in the nearby community that was identical in all regards, but it wasn't flooded, all homes went up 10%, you could say the differential, the 7% difference, was directly attributable to the flooding. So that's more or less how we did it. And by the way, this was not an easy research project to do. We could not get data on this from the Canadian Real Estate Association, from the Ontario Real Estate Association. Nobody wanted to give up their data because they thought, well, it's going to be bad news, and that's not good for real estate agents. What we ended up having to do is through realtor.ca, we went to all the different towns and communities in Canada, to the areas where we had identified that had realized these significant floods, and we just phoned one real estate agent after another who was a member of the local real estate boards, found those who were interested in climate change, and they were willing to do a day or two of work to get us the data, because they, as members of the local real estate board, had access to the data we needed. So it was like Woodward and Bernstein and Watergate and, trying to track down this data. But the point is, we got it. So what did we find? We found that so this is not modeling, this is not theoretical construct, this is what's already happened in the country over the last 10 years. With catastrophic flooding in communities, for at least up to 6 months after the flood occurred, homes sold in flood-impacted communities for 8.2% less in the aftermath of flooding. Your home didn't have to be flooded, you just had to be in a community that had experienced flooding. The average number of listings put on the market for a period of 6 months after the flood was reduced by 44% in the flood-impacted communities, presumably people waiting for the aura, the stigma of the flooding to pass. For homes that were put on the market, they took 20% longer to sell. We did not see a spike in mortgage arrears or deferrals. People could still pay their mortgages if they experienced one flood, but the reduction in the value of the home changed the loan-to-value ratio for a home, which means banks and those who offer mortgages were taking on a lot more risk than they had realized, and particularly CMHC, so this was of concern to them. And then bringing this stuff just a little bit closer to home, the other question we asked was, that's the financial stress, but what about the psychosocial, the mental health stress people realize when they go through these situations? And if you go in, I'm sure many of you have done this, if you meet people who have had a flooded basement and gone through these events, they'll make statements like, this is the worst thing we ever went through, and I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, and all that kind of stuff, when they've got 3 feet of sewer water in the basement. But could we actually quantify that stress? So the answer is yes. We went to Burlington, so just that way. Some of you will remember in August of 2014, Burlington experienced a major flood event. They had about 195 millimeters of rain, came down over a 12-hour period, and it flooded out about 3,300 homes in Burlington, which Burlington's not that big. 3,300 homes is a lot of homes, including, at the time, Rick Goldring's home, who was the mayor of Burlington back then. He had lived there 28 years and never seen a drop of water in his basement. Now he had 5.5 feet of water in his basement. We went back to Burlington, not 3 weeks or 3 months later, but we went back 3 years later in 2017, and we ran a survey through the communities on streets that were flooded versus a street that wasn't flooded, or homes on a street that were flooded versus not, and basically asked people a series of questions about how much stress do you feel every time there's a major precipitation event. for those who had been flooded 3 years earlier versus not. And by the way, I didn't think this study would even work. I didn't think anybody would answer it with the survey. I didn't think they'd participate. First of all, I couldn't have been more wrong. We had a single person knocking on doors that were flooded homes versus not. And we had to change the whole design of the project immediately, because not only were people answering the survey questions, 90% of the time they were being invited into the house, down into the basement. People wanted to show them the flood mark. They were booting up their computer to show them pictures of the flooding and all the debris that they put out in the boulevard. So now it wasn't safe. We had people being invited into a basement of a home alone, so we had to change that. The university went apoplectic. And but basically what it amounted to is we found that 48% of people ranked themselves as 4.5 to 5 out of 5 on a scale where 5 is the most stress you can feel. 48% of the people who experience flooding rank themselves as a 4.5 to 5 out of 5 every time, in terms of the stress they feel every time there's a major precipitation event, versus those who weren't flooded, who felt virtually no stress at all. And by the way, if the wind had been blowing a little bit to the east or a little bit to the west that day, this right now this would be Oakville or this would be Hamilton. It just was just bad luck for Burlington that particular day. Now what we're doing, and by the way, the average amount of time that people miss from work if they have a flooded basement is 7.1 days, or at least that's what it was for Burlington, so we're in that zone. The 7.1 days claim, that is a claim for life and health insurers, not property and casualty insurers. So before doing this study in the insurance sector, it was thought that climate change, extreme weather risk is only a problem for the property and casualty insurers. All of a sudden we found it's an issue for the life and health insurers because of lost time from work claims. Now what we're doing, and this is a study we have underway like now, we're looking at flood impacted communities. We're looking at spikes in medications to deal with psychosocial stress, spikes in claims to deal with counseling services, and then getting a stronger sense of documentation of lost time from work. So the life and health insurers are now realizing, holy cow, we're not immune to this climate change stuff. It's on our doorstep. Now, that's all the bad news, okay? So what's the good news? The good news is that in Canada, over the period of the last 3 to 5 years or something like that, no, more than that, 5 to 8 years, we, and there's a big we here, have developed very good guidance in the country as to how to in terms of developing guidelines, protocols, direction as to what can be done to limit risk due to flooding, wildfire, extreme heat, extreme weather perils. And the we here is it includes, it's a large group of entities. It is the Standards Council of Canada, the National Research Council, Canadian Standards Association, the Insurance Bureau of Canada. We were talking about ICLEI a little while ago. ICLEI, I'd like to think the Intact Center was kind of smack dab in the middle of all this. Conservation authorities, you name it. Federation of Canadian Municipalities, you name it. People who had expertise that needed to be at the table in terms of builders, developers, in terms of figuring out what do we need to do to mitigate risks under these various domains. And I know you can't read you're not meant to read the details on the reports, but I'm going to turn to that which you can read in a second. But we've got very good guidance now, just at a higher level, on what to do to mitigate flood risk at the level of the home, for the home that the homeowner they can do themselves at home to mitigate flood risk, what to do to mitigate risk in reference to new residential community design. How do we build new residential communities going forward such that when the big storms hit, everybody doesn't flood out? What can we do to retrofit existing communities to send water to safe locations and keep people and property out of harm's way? We've got very good guidance now for commercial real estate, office towers, condo towers, that sort of thing, such that when the big storms hit, they don't have underground parking lots that fill with water. And we've got good guidance on coastline resiliency to deal with things like a Hurricane Fiona coming up the east coast of Canada, let's say into Nova Scotia, that just occurred a year or two years ago. How do we deal with storm surge, king tides, and sea level rise all hitting together? We know a lot of what to do to prepare for flood damage. Similarly for wildfire, I'm not going to go into it here, but this is drawing a ton of our attention right now, and we've probably done in the last meeting, we being the Intact Center, I would say in the last 6 or 8 weeks, we've probably done 60 or 70 interviews with CBC, CTV, and Global News, you name it, because we're entering into wildfire season, and they all want to talk about how do we prepare homes, how do we prepare communities for wildfires, so they don't all burn down when the fire comes through. But the other thing that draws a ton of attention, I probably did 30 interviews on this in the last couple of weeks. In urban centers across the country, they wanted to talk about the impacts of wildfires on air quality within cities. When the air looks orange and it smells like a campfire, but you're in downtown Toronto or Oakville or Ottawa, how do we prepare, what are the impacts of wildfires on air quality, and how do we prepare for that? I even got a call, just parenthetically, from a little while ago maybe a month ago now, from the Blue Jays, which struck me, the head of risk for the Blue Jays, which struck me as kind of odd because I don't know anything about baseball. And I saw a baseball game once, and by like inning 2, I was ready to go. But anyhow, I thought, this is super slow, nothing's happening. But basically, their concern was with the wildfires last summer, for the fans who sit in the stands, there was a lot of concern about air quality, of sitting in the stands for hours at a time, poor air quality, what are the health implications? And whether they were right or wrong, just having that perception forced the Blue Jays to close the dome on the Rogers Stadium, and attendance in the stadium tends to be lower when the dome's closed versus when it's open. So they wanted to talk about the future of wildfire risk and air quality impacts. That was one. And then number 2 was extreme heat projections, which I'm going to come to in a bit, because what is Toronto going to look like going forward? Because you can't have people sitting in the stands when it's 35 degrees Celsius watching a baseball game. They have to close the dome, and again, that has an impact on the business case, on attendance. And the reason I mention that is it is amazing how many times now climate change manifests itself, even for someone who works on it a fair bit, the calls you get that are perfectly logical when you get the calls, but you would have never predicted them. There's almost no part of what goes on that isn't, industry sectors, societal functions that isn't affected by climate change one way or another. But just, we'll set the Blue Jays aside for the moment. We've got very good guidance on what to do to prepare homes and communities for wildfire, for extreme heat. What do you do for particularly people living in older apartment buildings? This is an area that where people are particularly vulnerable. And the most vulnerable group in Canada, it is the elderly over 70 years of age living alone who are financially challenged. These are the people who actually die when extreme heat hits. And financially challenged is sort of a code for they don't have air conditioning. We do a lot of work, we don't have time to go into it now, but we do a lot of work on retaining and restoring natural infrastructure to mitigate flood risk and realize all the other benefits associated with biodiversity. Look at the health impacts of climate change, extreme weather risk, and then we're up to our earlobes working with the capital markets, pension funds in particular. How do they factor physical climate risk into investment decision making? Because you can invest a lot of money in a company that can be significantly impacted by extreme weather events that ultimately can cause its share price to go down a lot. So we spend a lot of time with them on how do you actually factor physical climate risk into institutional investment decision making. When the investors ask questions about your preparedness as a company for climate change, even companies that otherwise wouldn't give it the time of day, it goes right to the top of the list of concerns, because if the investors are asking, it's important. So, but one of the things we found over the years is that when we write these reports, which are always user-friendly, they're about maybe 30 to 60 pages in length, they're written in such a way that a smart kid in grade 10 can understand them, grade 8 can understand them. The upfront executive summary contains basically 90% of what you need to know, and there's probably 60 to 80 people are part of the authorship of all these reports. The bottom line is people don't read reports. That's just the way it is. They like to know they're there, but they don't want to read them. And that's when you're with ministers, deputy ministers, mayors but not the mayor of Oakville, councilors, corporate leaders, even many NGOs. People don't read reports, but they like to know they're there. So what we've done, we figured out a way to take what's in reports and distill it down to what we call single-page infographics that are instantaneously understandable when someone looks at them within 60 seconds. We take the core messaging in the report and we bring it down to do the following to mitigate flood risk or wildfire risk or extreme heat risk. And this stuff now, this is golden. This is when you're with, it doesn't matter if you're with the Prime Minister, you name it, when people look at the infographics, they go, I get it. In 30 seconds, you just told me what I need to know. And I was meeting with Sean Tupper not all that long ago, well, maybe a year ago now, where we were delving into this stuff in some detail. He's the Deputy Minister of Public Safety Canada. Putting the infographic in front of him at the beginning of the meeting kind of screwed up the meeting because all he did was stare at the infographic. I don't think he ever heard a word I was saying. And I could see him circling boxes on it to say, he goes, holy crap, I've got to do this around my house this weekend, right? So we brought it down to these infographics that encapsulate messaging, and then we distribute these things aggressively. And let me just show you one example, and this is all on our website, and it's all free, right, where I'm not selling anything. When we wrote the report on flood risk protection for homes, this report on the left, part of what we did in writing that report, we went into about 700 homes in New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario, and Saskatchewan, and we spent about an hour and a half to 3.5 hours per home documenting any deficiencies around the outside of the home that could contribute to flooding, or inside the house that could contribute to basement flooding. Starting outside the home would be, for example, just the grading around the house. Does the grading direct water away from the house or towards it? And by the way, I should show you this data on a separate presentation, but we found 70% of homes in the country have somewhere around the property where the grading directs water towards the house versus away from it. 70% of homes. But we took the messaging in that report and brought it down to this single-page infographic, which hopefully you can see here. And the way it works, and again, this is all on our website, so if you want to see the details, there's no problem, it's all there. Along the top row, we have 5 factors that you can attend to around your house for no money. It doesn't cost you anything. It's just a little bit of exercise on your part that can lower the probability that you'll end up with a flooded basement when a big storm hits. For example, I won't go through every box. This box here shows somebody's sub pump in the basement. A sub pump is a pump that sits in a bucket below the basement floor that is such that if water gets into the basement, it flows into this bucket. There's a pump there, and the pump pumps the water outside, so that's a good thing. But one of the things you want to do is check the sub pump ahead of the storm to make sure it actually works. And you can do that by taking a bucket of water, pouring it into the sump well, and see, does the pump turn on and pump water outside? If it does, that's good. If it doesn't, you've got a problem, if the motor's seized or whatever it is. Most people find out their sub pump doesn't work when they've got 3.5 feet of sewer water in their basement. And by the way, the average cost of a flooded basement is $54,000. If you don't have insurance coverage or partial coverage, that's a big hit for most people. And by the way, it's non-negotiable spending. You have to produce that $54,000 instantly to solve the problem, because if your basement floods on a Monday morning, you have to solve the problem by Wednesday of that week or the house is uninhabitable. You've got a basement full of sewer water. So this is a simple check. A backwater valve, just to give you 1 or 2 more examples, a backwater valve is a valve that's on, the little drain that's in your basement that if the dishwasher overflowed or the washing machine overflowed, water would flow out. Well, in older communities where the storm and sanitary sewer lines can overlap, can be connected, if you get a big storm occurring, water can actually fill the sewer system, back up through that line, and come up into your basement, which insurance terms is creatively called sewer backup flooding. But you can put a valve on that line that makes it such that water can flow out of the basement, but there could be a little trap door or a ball, it depends on the system you have. It makes it such that water can flow out of the basement, but if water tries to come back in, a door goes up and shuts and stops the water from coming into the basement. But if you don't, for this little valve, if you don't clean it spring and fall twice a year to remove any crud, you know, I don't know what the technical term is, but you get my point. 85% of the time it won't seal. We found that 55% of the homes we went into who had a backwater valve never maintained it from 1 year to the next, which basically meant it was a decoration in the basement. They thought they were safe, and it was probably non-functional. And it's literally 5 or 10 minutes with a toilet brush to clean it spring and fall. It's sort of like the equivalent of changing the batteries in the smoke detector and the carbon monoxide detector to make sure this thing works versus not. And then there's things you do a little bit for under $250, but still kind of do it yourself. Almost everything on this sheet, most people could do over a long weekend with limited technical expertise, generally speaking, for a few $100s. You can put plastic covers over window wells to make sure when the big storms hit, the water doesn't fill the window wells, subsequently flow into the basement, which is called overland flooding, which unless you've picked for that particular type of insurance for overland flooding, it means you're not covered for it. So things like you can have disconnect the downspout from the east trough if it goes into the weeping tile system, direct water away from the house and not towards your neighbor's house. You can have flood alarms in the basement. I have flood alarms in my basement. If I got water in my basement right now, it would send a signal to my phone to tell me I got water in the basement floor, go fix it. Then we have things that are a little bit more expensive, over $250, but not off the charts. It's things like installing a backwater valve if you don't have one, or with our friend the sub pump, having 2 sub pumps just to be doubly sure that, first of all, one of them at least is going to function, but also you have an external energy supply, a battery to run the sub pump in the event that the power goes out, because the time you need the sub pump to work is when the big storms hit. When the big storms hit, usually the power goes out, so the time you actually need it to do something, it's not available. But it's about a $300 kit and not terribly complicated. A handy person could install it over a weekend, and that would give you running of a sub pump up to 48 to 72 hours, depending on the battery you get. So these are all things that can be operationalized for, generally speaking, not much money, that can take the average house on a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being the worst for basement flooding. You can take it from an 80 down to a 20, just like that. And, yeah.
I would just like to mention, Halton Region does have a basement flooding subsidy program, so any of these, this is great information. If you are interested in any, I would look up Halton Region and see.
And it's a great announcement to make, by the way, because what we do find also, I don't know exactly where it is right now for most cities in Canada, but I don't know if you go back 8 years ago, like the city of Toronto, for example, had these subsidies. But the uptake was almost zero because very often nobody knew they even existed, right? And it was sort of hard to navigate. But I would, very much my impression is Oakville is well ahead of the curve on this file. And the other thing is people will say to me sometimes, yeah, but is this expensive? What, putting in a backwater valve, installing it in the average home might be like $2,800 to $3,000, but then you get a subsidy quite often for about maybe 70% of that or something like it. But you say to yourself, okay, there's a bit of money there, but compared to having assuming you have the average basement flood of $54,000, it's a pretty darn good investment, And a little bit of planning and effort to mobilize this is a very good use of time. I find it remarkable. People spend more time planning their vacations than they do into protecting their home, which is their biggest investment in life, and their retirement plan. And very often they don't make the effort to protect it. But one thing we do find, arguing against myself, is that when you do, though, give this information to homeowners, and we've tested this with Red Cross in a lot of communities across the country, when people receive this information, then the question is, so what? Did they do anything with it? When we go back 6 months later, 70% of people will have taken at least 2 actions that they otherwise wouldn't have taken to protect their basement from flooding when they receive this information. In other words, they will act when they know what to do. Very often, the reason people don't act is they simply just don't know. So it works. And now we're working on, and by the way, we're putting this now on, we're animating this. So every one of these boxes you can click on and a video will come up or an animation will come up. And then we're looking at now its deployment on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and I forget the others. But there's people who know, I don't know how to do it, but there's people who know how to do it to make this show up on your phone. And that's necessary because you go to a restaurant here, at noon, and you'll see, are people talking? No. There's 6 people around a table, 5 of them are staring at a phone, right? That's what they like, so that's where we'll put it. Right now, that infographic that I just showed you, that's being distributed, and here's a short list. It started in Nova Scotia, but it's being distributed to homeowners across Canada through a variety of means, but for these cities, they're either doing it or they're in the process of doing it. They include the infographic in with the property tax notices, the mail-outs in the spring and the fall with property tax notices. When you get that envelope, you have to open it. You can't throw it away as junk mail. And what will happen is the city will put its logo on it, and you can put a picture of the mayor on it. You can do whatever you want to make it your own, but this is one means of mechanism whereby it's getting out to homeowners. And then mayors are putting it in their newsletters and councilors and so forth. So multiple avenues to get this information in the hands of homeowners. So we've got it going out right now to about 3.4 million households across Canada. And the number, now it's just growing very, very rapidly. And once a few do it, then the rest do it. And then we have some of the major financial institutions. Bank of Montreal now, when you get a mortgage with Bank of Montreal, they give you this infographic on how to protect your home from basement flooding. They also include the wildfire infographic and extreme heat. The same for Scotiabank. And then, a matter of fact, early this morning, RBC called me, and they want to meet because they want to include this in all their mortgage closing packages. And then for all the mortgages they hold, they mail out this infographic or email it, however they get it there, for those customers for whom they hold mortgages. Spring and fall, they resend out the infographics as a reminder to protect your home. And the reason they did it for the banks, it was 2 reasons. One is they don't want to hold a mortgage on a property where the basement floods. That's just not good. Number 2, though, is that when they offer 5-year mortgages, very often, when you get a mortgage, let's say it's 5 years, 4.5 years go by and you don't hear from the bank. And then at the end of 4.5 years, they say, we really value your service and we hope you renew with us. And that's it. But what they liked about this was it gave them touch points twice a year to bring a value-add contribution to the customer base and build loyalty. So, and then I was just saying, we now with Emergency Management Ontario, they're now promoting this stuff very aggressively to 444 community emergency management coordinators across the province. And Bernie Darabla, I say Darable, but there's a French way of saying it, and that I don't know. And he's the Deputy Minister of Emergency Management Ontario. He just loved this stuff. He was all over it very quickly. Former military person, he said, we're going to do it, we're going to do it now. Like military people, they're very good. They get stuff done. Just to let you know, I'm not going to go into any of this now, I'll just go real quick, but we have the same type of guidance for flood risk protection for commercial real estate, and which would be office towers, condo towers, that sort of thing. How do you protect server rooms? How do you make it so that somebody doesn't get in an elevator that goes into an underground parking lot that's full of water? I just wanted to make you aware of this, that and this was developed with RealPAC and BOMA, which are the 2 largest commercial real estate associations in the country. But under plans and direction, equipment and sales, and major retrofits, we can protect, it's not just homes, but we can protect office towers, large buildings, that sort of thing. We've got the guidance, so I just want to make you aware of that. And then we also have good guidance on what you can do at the community level in terms of retaining and restoring natural infrastructure on the landscape to give water a place to go and reside when the big storms hit. In southern Ontario, that helps diminish the probability of flooding. In southern Ontario, over the last 100 years, we've removed about 72 to 73% of the natural infrastructure that was originally here, the forests, the fields, the wetlands. They're now gone. It's either paved over or turned into agricultural production. And it is, in both those situations, it's such that by and large, when the rain comes down and it hits pavement, it runs off the landscape very, very quickly and potentially contributes to flooding. So what we're doing is trying to retain what we have in terms of natural infrastructure and restore what we've lost to help mitigate, amongst other factors, flood risk. And that's a whole dissertation on its own. I'm going to flip channels now to extreme heat, and I'll go a little bit quicker just in case we're running out of time. But we released this report, Irreversible Extreme Heat, Protecting Canadians and Communities from a Lethal Future, and the word lethal actually applies. As I mentioned at the outset, in 2021, we had 619 people die in BC due to extreme heat. 86 people die in Quebec in 2018 due to extreme heat. Under both of those circumstances, under both of those scenarios, people died under quote-unquote good circumstances. And by that, what I mean is the electricity was still running. Had there been a major electricity outage during either one of those events, those deaths would have been way up into the thousands. So when we talk about the problems of flooding and wildfire, the costs are largely financial or psychosocial. But by and large, people don't die with flooding and wildfires. It might be 0, 1, 2, 3, perhaps 4 people. And I don't mean that as ignoring that. You know, one person dying is one too many, obviously. But with flooding and wildfire, primarily the costs are financial or psychosocial. With extreme heat, the financial costs are not high, but people die, and they die in high numbers. So the heat is something we really need to address. And by the way, in this report, what we documented was that there are really a few zones in Canada that are particularly vulnerable to extreme heat going forward. It's the south central region of British Columbia, Mountain Valley regions along the US border. That's one area that's going to get super hot going forward. The southern prairie regions along the US border. And the third area is the north shore of Lake Erie on out through to the St. Lawrence River Valley. These are the three areas that are going to get disproportionately hot going forward. The most vulnerable population, members of the population to extreme heat, at the top of the list, those who die, it's the elderly over 70 years of age, living alone who are financially challenged, which probably means they don't have an air conditioner. Number 2 are the homeless, particularly at risk. And number 3, people with pre-existing health conditions that are largely cardiac and pulmonary in nature, or asthma related in nature very often. Those are the groups that are the most at risk. And as a general rule of thumb, for cities across Canada from east to west going forward, between now and 2050 to 2080, the maximum summer temperatures for most major cities across Canada will increase by about 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. So if you tap out right now at 35 degrees Celsius, that's going to go up to 38, 39, 40 degrees Celsius. And the number of hot days per summer, defined as over 30 degrees Celsius, for most major Canadian cities, it's at least going to double the number of hot days per summer over 30 degrees Celsius. In some cases, triple, and in some cases, like Windsor, quadruple. Four times the number of hot days over 30 degrees Celsius. And just to show you this data, what it looks like, along the top part of the chart shows the number of very hot days over 30 degrees Celsius. So let's just zero in on Toronto. This is Toronto. Right now, we have something like, it's about 12 or 14 days per summer over 30 degrees Celsius. And by Toronto, it means Oakville, it's the same thing. 12 to 14 days per summer over 30 degrees Celsius. That's going to go up to about 55 days per summer over 30 degrees Celsius. So more or less, a tripling or not far off. The maximum summer temperatures realized in this region right now, they top out at about 34, 35 degrees Celsius. That's going to go up to just over 38 degrees Celsius. So the heat is coming, for sure. And the question is, what do you do about it? Here's another infographic. Again, all these infographics are on our website, so they're instantly accessible. Here's our infographic for apartment and condo heat protection. We have another one for houses. But along the top row are things you could, are do-it-yourself for $0, things you could do for extreme heat. The next row down are things you can do for under $250, a little bit of money, and then more expensively in the further down the row across the bottom. But for example, in the upper left-hand corner, one of the things we need to work out to protect particularly the most vulnerable, the elderly, living alone, financially challenged, we need to map out for a city, in cities, where do these people live? We actually need to know where they are. It might even be working with people like Meals on Wheels, who would know this to a certain extent, who can identify, we know where they are, and when a heat wave hits, we have a program that kicks into play that someone is literally knocking on their door on a daily basis during the heat wave to make sure, are you okay? Are you properly hydrated? Do you need a trip to a cooling center? Do you have a fan? That sort of thing, or air conditioner. What can we do to help you? But we need that program, which, by the way, with Emergency Management Ontario, there's actually a way to get at this data that I didn't realize that already exists. So that's good. But then there's other things you want. You can have a combination of passive cooling, which is on here. Don't even need to point to them. It's things like glazing on windows to keep sunlight out from entering into an apartment that otherwise may become super hot. It's mechanical shutters on windows. It's awnings over windows to keep sunlight out. It's more shade trees in proximity to buildings to create shade, so the heat of the sun isn't barreling down directly on the building. I was just back from Europe not too long ago in Athens, Turkey, and some other place, Rome, Italy, and you just see over there, virtually everywhere you go, the apartments all have awnings, mechanical shutters, like real awnings, not decorative. I mean real awnings that actually go right out over the balcony so the sunlight does not enter through the windows. Mechanical, real shutters that close on windows that when combined with an air conditioner or heat pump, the temperature inside can be tolerable even when it's 43 degrees Celsius outside. And but without the mechanical shelters, the awnings and so forth, the air conditioners could not keep up, right? Well, we need to do more of that here. And we need to actually, and this is one that, it was with Matt Galloway, somebody was talking about CBC, I do a lot with Matt Galloway. One of the things we talk about in the news was also, I personally believe in this country, we need to think about access to cooling as a fundamental human right. So the same way we think of access to warmth in the winter to keep people safe and out of harm's way and they don't freeze to death with cold, you can die or suffer unduly just as quickly from extreme heat. And that means ultimately you can have all the passive forms of cooling that you should put in place that I just described, but also at the end of the day, you're still going to need an air conditioner, or it makes people feel better when you say heat pump. A heat pump in the summer is an air conditioner, but to give at least one cool room in an apartment. So if you have a 600 or 700 square foot apartment, you still need, if you can put a 5,000 BTU air conditioner in the wall that'll keep that at least one room cool, which can be the difference between somebody living and dying. And literally, if you go to the Home Depot just around the corner here, because I went there, I wanted to know, it's $150 for a 5,000 BTU air conditioner. It lasts on average 10 years, so that's 15 years per summer. And if you use it for 3 months in the summer, that's $5 per month. $5 per month could be the difference between living and dying for people who might otherwise suffer unduly, or just have a terrible summer, with extreme heat. And you know what, though? You get pushback on this. People say, well, does this put more demand on the grid? More demand on, air conditioning is going to promote CO2 emissions, which, by the way, most of this light in here right now is carbon-free. But there is no way you can say to someone who's living in a 700-foot, 650-square-foot apartment building when it's 38 degrees Celsius outside and even hotter inside, that you can't have an air conditioner, yet you've got somebody in Oakville or Rosedale or whatever it is sitting in a 7,000-square-foot home, all of which is cooled down and probably nobody's there. So we really need to promote this aggressively. And you look right now, by the way, I hope you don't mind, now I'm getting off script, but it doesn't matter. You look right now, what Myanmar is going through at this moment, right now in Myanmar it's between 40, 43 degrees Celsius. They've shut down the schools because it's too hot for the kids to go to school, and their electricity production in Myanmar right now is at 50% because the water has dried up in the rivers. They don't have, so now they have rolling blackouts going on all the time because during this extreme heat, the other climate impact was lack of rainfall, and they don't have water supply to run the hydroelectricity. And Southeast Asia right now is going through more or less the same thing. There's absolutely no reason that can't come to Canada. It is coming to Canada. We're just not, we haven't got hit by it yet. I told you this stuff's all, it's depressing, but there's things we can do. This, I've just got to mention this to you. I don't think wildfire in terms of homes burning down or whatever due to wildfire in this region is particularly problematic, but there's a lot of people here or in this neighborhood who own cottages that are in areas that are certainly vulnerable to fire. We know, I'm not going to go through this because we don't have time, but we have very good guidance called Fire Smart that the guidance is captured in this report that we released, whatever that says, December 2023, so not too long ago, accompanied by infographics in terms of what you do to prepare a house and a community for wildfire to make it such that when fire comes through a region, you don't burn down. And by deploying the direction in these infographics, you reduce the probability of a house burning down by 50 to 75%. Well documented through a group called FireSmart that have been around for 30 years. And this is now, it was good. I was listening to the Minister Sajan the other day on the news talking about wildfires in Canada. He literally read from these infographics. So, they're getting it. So summary discussion, just a few takeaway points of little bits of information I've conveyed when I was talking. Residential basement flooding costs are up. It's the #1 cost of climate change in Canada, Ontario, and Oakville. That's the biggest cost. Homeowners and those renting basement apartments, and there are 500,000 people in the greater GTA region renting basement apartments, they're at an increasing risk of flooding. The average cost of a flooded basement in today's dollars is $54,000. And this point on renters is very, very important because with more or less 500,000 people living in basement apartments through this region, and I don't know exactly where it stops and starts, the greater GTA region. And this is a calculation by the Chief Resiliency Officer of Toronto, back when he was Chief Resiliency Officer. A lot of time people think when we talk about protecting homes from flooding, they'll say, yeah, but isn't that just for rich homeowners? In other words, the idea being if you own a home, you're rich. But you go, look at, there are 500,000 people living in basement apartments, and not to be indelicate, but by and large, if you're living in a basement apartment, these are not high net worth individuals, such that if that basement floods, and they are literally on the street, they can't just go, oh, well, this is no problem. I'll just go live at the Westin Hotel for a month while you put my basement back to work. They have no money, to do that. So by promoting initiatives that make it such that the house doesn't flood, you benefit the homeowner and you benefit the renter, the people living in the basement apartments. Everybody wins by not having the problem. The best way to solve the problem is don't have the problem. I did a whole series last week, 2 weeks ago with Teresa Tam. I don't know if you know her. She's the Chief Health Officer for Canada. You saw her in the news all the time during the COVID. Even Teresa, who's super smart, really gets stuff, Teresa said, but Health Canada, they're always dealing with the problem after it happened. It's relocation. It's getting people back into their home. It's helping those who are dislocated from their homes. But their efforts were always focused on after the bomb's gone off. My view is, let's not have the bomb go off. Let's be upfront. Let's get all the risk out of the system we can, and then whatever remains, we'll deal with it. We at least take it from a big bomb to a little bomb. And it was funny with Teresa. She wouldn't mind me saying that. She goes, I just never thought about it. I did not realize there's things you can do preemptively. Even Steve Guilbeault, the Minister of the Environment, who, if he was here, I would say it like he's a friend. He said, he never thought about adaptation ever before becoming Minister of the Environment. He always thought about mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. He knows a lot about it. But he didn't think that there was anything you could do to prevent these disasters. And now he's getting religion, on the file. Home flood protection helps to ensure the insurability of homes and the capacity to secure a mortgage. 70% of homeowners who receive the 3 steps guidance to limit flood risk take 2 actions within 6 months to limit their risk of basement flooding. They will act when they know what to do. And in reference to cooling or heat, Canada needs to consider access to cooling as at least in my view, as a fundamental human right. And we need to help prepare these vulnerable populations that otherwise, really can't help themselves. So, thank you very much for your attention. That's it. And any questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much. There was so much great information in there. Just a personal view from working with the town, those infographics are fantastic. Definitely the one on the relief and apartments, I think we can use for our Oakville community grant, because that is a target audience that we're looking for, people in high-rise buildings and obviously vulnerable populations. So we'll definitely be using that. Thank you. And then also it's emergency preparedness week, but it's also building safety month. So we're a little late now, but I would love to include the basement flooding infographic in tax receipts going out maybe around this time next year. So that's fantastic.
Perfect. And we will give you, by the way, like high resolution stuff. Like you don't have to worry about any of that. And you can modify it and move boxes, but personalize it. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great, and great view on the adaptation. We've been working in the adaptation space for a while, and everything was focused on mitigation, and it's, like you said, coming around the last decade or so, where adaptation is very important. It's just really harder to measure and to justify all the upfront costs without actually having the event happen. So yeah, it's just a little bit of a harder space to work on for mitigation, where you can track and measure.
Yeah. You could put an energy efficiency program into this building and you can look before and after and do a quick comparison. Documenting avoided losses is a trickier proposition. Do we have lots of information? Basically what we have are proxies for it and models of it and so forth. But we're working pretty aggressively, not aggressively, anxiously, if you will, to better document the returns on investment. We know they're there. One of the problems, and you're smack dab in the middle of this. You're in a chicken and egg position. In theory, it's not hard. We could actually take two streets, in theory, we could take streets that have the houses identical in both regards, except one has put in place a whole bunch of the flood protection measures and one hasn't, then flood the whole place and look at the difference between the two. Like if you're doing it on paper, it's quite simple. The actual execution of it is a little bit more tricky. But what we are doing though is, and I think we can do this with Ernie's Emergency Management Ontario, is we can literally go to homes one by one by one and say, what features do you have in your basement? Fortuitously, backwater valve, sub pump with battery backup supply, disconnected downspout, plastic covers over window wells. Document that. And then look at what have been your insurance claims for the last 10 years. And we can go to the next house and do it and do it and do it. And then using multiple regression, stepwise regression analysis, I think we can partition out, what of the variables explained most of the claims in the insurance claims, what reduced it the most, second most, the third most. We can get at it more that way, but the problem is with the insurers, and obviously I'm pretty deeply tied into Intact, so that's the biggest insurer in Canada by far on property and casualty. Historically, they have not collected data on homes, like do they have a backwater valve? Did they have the battery backup supply? They just went in and they might have gone, how far is the fire hydrant from the house and something else. Historically, they just didn't have it. That's not a criticism, they just didn't know at the time. So, but you've hit the challenge, you've hit the nail on the head for the challenge that's on my plate, is to figure out how do we make this an even more compelling argument. But when you start to say to people, by the way, you're not going to get insurance for your house if you don't do this, or you can't get a mortgage, that means your house has now become a stranded asset, right? So we're almost going from limited to no data to, if you don't do this, you've lost your biggest investment in life. So, but the other thing, I hope you don't, I know I'm rambling, but the other thing is in preparing homes though, the way I look at it, we're not talking giant volumes of money. This is almost the equivalent. To build a home right versus build it wrong under the umbrella of adaptation, it's almost the same cost. But if you build it wrong and then have to retrofit or a community, it's enormously expensive. And I kind of look at it as, you know, you're going on a road trip. It's very prudent to put a little bit of effort into making sure you've changed the oil in your car, you've tuned it up, and the spare tire actually has air in it. You know, for a little bit of preparedness, you can save a lot of grief. And the ratio between what you have to spend versus the benefits, they're logarithmic differences, you know. And but you're right. We've got to make the argument stronger. And by the way, there's a ton of people in this country. As a matter of fact, I'm speaking at the Royal York Hotel this afternoon to 400 brokers from out west, from Western Canada. I don't know why they're all here. I just didn't go there. But anyhow, they talk about carbon footprint, but we won't talk about that. I can tell you right now, 50% of the people I'm going to be with this afternoon do not believe climate change is real. Like, never mind human-induced. They don't believe it's real, right? So I have to start out with explaining that climate change is real, and this is why, without offending them, right? And there's a way to do that. You know, I've done 500 radio interviews where people call in and well, we've always had climate change. I had one guy say, he started out with, he goes, you know, the Earth was hotter when it was formed. I go, yeah, 4.7 billion years ago when it was a molten mass, it was hotter. And then he said, you know, it was hotter when the dinosaurs were here. I said, I had no idea when he thought the dinosaurs were here, but I said, yeah, 65 million years ago, it was hotter when the dinosaurs were here. And I could see where he was going. He was going, it was hot to form, hot 65 million years ago. We're still here, so what's the problem, you know? I mean, but you have to address those things, and you have to do them respectfully. Like, you have to do them with deference, you know? But anyhow, I just want to say I really admire what collectively you're doing here. You know, it brings tremendous value to the city and to the population. And if there's anything you think of that we can help with, just let me know. You know, we can help. Yeah. And if I can't help, I'll know who can help. Yeah. I don't have them with me, but if you go to our website, you can print like till the cows come home, right? So they're all there, they're high resolution, and they're free. And I just don't carry them because I end up carrying stacks. But they're all there for the taking. And one of the nice things about the position we're in, we're not selling anything. Like the more people steal our stuff, the better. You know, that's good, right? It's even bizarre at the university when we have funding come in from different agencies and whatever. University of Waterloo is an engineering university, and everybody's concerned about, you know, the contracts you sign are all on proprietary rights, because it's someone building, you know, new calipers for the Toyota Corolla or something like that, right? Well, who's going to own this, right? The legal people at the university can't get their heads wrapped around the fact that everything we do, we're giving away, you know? They say, well, you know, how difficult is that to grasp? But I hope you're not lawyers, but anyhow, yeah. It's shocking how easy it is to do this stuff. Yeah. 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 Send me an email and I'll set you up virtually instantly. So, or go ahead, you had more? Yeah. Yeah. Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, or yeah. Yeah. Use the one I'm giving you. And the reason is, and it's the Canadian Institute for Climate Change. No, the Climate Change Institute, Canadian Climate Change Institute, whatever it is. I used to chair the adaptation division for it, except I can't remember the name. So I know it well. And Canadian Climate Institute, yeah, because there's the Waterloo Climate Institute, there's the Canadian Climate Institute. They're both in Waterloo, which seems weird to me that they almost have the same name, but it's the Canadian Climate Institute, which is so that's it. The numbers that they put out are something like, $1 invested produces 12 to, and then it goes up to some super high number. But that's, it's not creative accounting and it's not disingenuous, but really what they're saying is they're taking the monies that have been saved, the money that wasn't lost, and then saying if that was redeployed, it could have this benefit down the road. Like it's kind of an additive effect. Like how far down the road do you go in terms of the return realized, right? So it's avoided losses applied to revenue generation. For ours, I keep it very directly to this $1 stop this amount of basement flooding. If you go, like I used to be VP of the Bank of Montreal and with institutional investing, so I know how these people think. If you walk through the door with some astronomical returns on things, they're just going to look at you and go, this is total, well, I was going to use a bad word, but this is total nonsense. And so what you want to do, you want to present a good return on investment, as it exists for avoidance of having problems, but don't be ridiculous. No, that's okay, I get it. But don't go over the top, $1 in, $3 to $8 in savings. Warren Buffett would look at that and go, that's fantastic. If you can do that, I'm on board, right? But if you go $1 in is 30 or 40 or 50 or $80 savings, they're just going to walk away. You're going to lose them all. So what I prefer is to make the argument say the conservative end of the equation, the low end of the equation, is still a really good place to be. We're not talking $1 produces $1.20. We're talking $1 produces $3. So I've got an op-ed coming out in the Globe and Mail very, very shortly, where I've argued for taking the revenue from the carbon tax, which is touted as being revenue neutral or slightly positive, and saying rather than revenue neutral or slightly positive, why don't we invest that money in adaptation and get a 3 to 8 time return? So that's going to come out pretty soon. Any other? No, he was just waving. But so yeah, and yeah, we will get you whatever information you want, high resolution graphics, you name it. Yeah, Rick Goldring he started the work, and Eleanor McMahon. I don't know if you knew Eleanor when she was there. She now works for the university. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
This is working. Perfect. I just wanted to say a quick thank you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. And then also thank you to everybody who came out to listen and to get more informed and more involved. One of the messages that OakvilleReady keeps trying to reiterate is just that the more people that we can get informed, the more people we can get learning with us and get involved, the better equipped we can be when we do experience these events. And as you were saying, just the more that we can reduce these negative effects that we get from these extreme weather events. So thank you so much for being here. Thank everybody who's also watching and listening on the live stream. I also want to mention we do have this recorded. We will be sharing it with everyone here. We'll be sharing it on the HEN Facebook page as well. So if you know anybody else who's interested, who might want to get involved and learn a little bit more, please just continue to share the message for us. And then lastly, we have launched the OakvilleReady Community Climate Action Grant, as Tricia has mentioned. This is open to pretty much all Oakville residents. We're hoping to get either informal Oakville residential groups involved, so if it's just a group of residents, more than 3 households, they can apply. We are also open to any community groups, so any volunteer-led community groups, things like student councils, parent councils, service clubs, any sort of like resident associations, those sorts of things can apply. And then also, of course, any of the volunteer-led nonprofit organizations can also apply. So Tricia and I will be at the back there with more information. If you're looking for any of the eligibility guidelines, if you'd like to apply, everything is available on OakvilleReady.ca. And then, of course, you can email us if you have any questions or need more information. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, move.